It was a freezing Friday night in a small Nevada town when a lone traveler checked into a rundown roadside motel. The neon sign flickered as if warning him to leave, and he thought he was alone until a shadow moved behind the cracked window blinds. Tall, too thin to still. Every time he blinked, it seemed closer, staring, waiting, smiling in a way. No human shared the hallways were silent, except for the hum of the broken air conditioner and an occasional drip of water from the ceiling he unpacked his bag and tried to shake off the feeling that someone was watching. But the instant he turned around, he glimpsed a figure in the corner of his eye. Long fingers, bending impossibly eyes, glowing faintly red, as if sensing his fear. He sat on the edge of the bed and heard soft tapping on the window, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a countdown. Every heartbeat matched the knocking, and when he mustered courage to look, he saw nothing, yet felt an intense presence pressing down on him, like the air itself was heavy and alive. The room seemed to breathe shadows moving along the walls, stretching toward him as flashlight flickered, then died, leaving only moonlight filtering through the blinds, revealing nothing but the shifting darkness that seemed to pulse with life. And then he heard whispers, low, guttural voices speaking words he could not understand, but each syllable pierced his mind, and suddenly the doorknob rattled violently as if someone was trying to come in. He backed into the corner, and the window blinds lifted on their own. A tall figure leaned in with a smile too wide stretching from ear to ear, its face melting into shadow while its elongated hands tapped on the glass, testing him, pressing him, tearing him to move. The floorboards creaked under invisible weight footsteps, pacing closer and farther away, and then a soft dragging sound under the bed. He peeked and saw darkness moving against the grain, like it was alive, reaching toward his legs, pulling him subtly toward the void. The clock ticked slower, each second stretching minutes into eternity. The walls seemed to warp the ceiling, bending downward, shadows forming shapes of people long dead, their faces twisted, frozen in terror. Silent screams echoing in his skull. He ran to the bathroom, turned on the light, but a reflection in the mirror was not his own eyes. Black with slits of red pupils, a grin wider than any mouth should stretch across his face. A cold wind blew inside the sealed room, papers and towels flying as if some invisible force was rearranging the space. And then the lights died, plunging him into absolute darkness. The tapping turned into pounding, and whispers turned into a chorus, calling his name, urging him to join them, to become one with the shadows. He grabbed the door handle, and it burned his hand like ice and fire. At once he stumbled into the corridor, shadows crawling along the walls, floorboards cracking under while not his own. He sprinted toward the lobby, every step echoing unnaturally. Behind him, figures emerging from walls, from the ceiling, long thin bodies, moving wrong, bending in ways that made his stomach churn. He burst through the main door into the parking lot, only to see dozens of silhouettes standing under flickering streetlights, each head tilting unnaturally, eyes glowing, watching him in silence. He ran to his car, fumbling keys falling to the ground as a shadow stretched across the asphalt, taller than any human reaching toward him, his heartbeat deafening in his ears. When he finally started the engine, the car lights illuminated the lot, but the figures had vanished, leaving only fog thick enough to choke every inhale. He drove fast down the highway, trees leaning, inward shadows brushing against the windows. Every mile, a new figure appearing at the edge of headlights, sometimes sitting on the roof, sometimes crawling along the hood. And when he looked in the rearview mirror, dozens of eyes reflected back, waiting, silently, patient, hunting. He realized the road looped back to the town. No matter how fast he drove, the town approached again. The same neon motel sign, flickering as if mocking him. He slammed on brakes, jumped out, running across asphalt, feeling invisible. hands clawing at his back. The sky darkened, unnaturally stars disappearing one by one, clouds swirling into a vortex overhead. A faint echo of laughter carried by the wind. He fell into a ditch, cold mud and water rising up, dragging him down into earth's roots, grasping like fingers, bones snapping around him, whispers chanting. He could barely breathe. Then he was in a cellar walls, made of fused human bones, faces pressed into the mud, screaming mouths, open eyes staring accusingly to shadow, rose from the far corner limbs, bending wrong head, tilting, staring at him with a grin that burned into his mind. It whispered, "You are ours now," and the floor pulsed like a heartbeat, dragging him, deeper faces shifting, whispering, telling him secrets. Meant to drive him mad, he tried to scream, but the air thick heavy would not let his voice escape. Darkness pressing from all sides. Finally, he woke in his bed, sunlight spilling across the room, birds chirping as if nothing happened, but shadows lingered. In the corners, breathing, waiting, tapping, beginning again. Slow, deliberate, closer than before. He dared not move, and when he looked at the mirror, his reflection grinned wider than it should, and he knew the town would never let him go. The night would return, the shadows would come, and he would run forever, but never escape. Somewhere the motel sign flickered in the distance, warning anyone else who dared enter, because the horrors inside the town were patient, timeless, and hungry. The wind carried whispers of those who had vanished, faces appearing in windows, eyes in the dark alleys. He could hear footsteps following him, even in daylight, and every shadow moved of its own accord. Walls, breathing floors, pulsing trees, bending unnaturally. The air thick with anticipation. He ran into the forest branches, clawing at him, pulling him back, roots twisting around his ankles. Like living snakes, he stumbled down a ravine, the shadows cascading from above, pressing from every direction. The moonlight, distorted shadows dancing on the walls of the canyon, screaming silently. The wind filled with whispers, pleading, begging, mocking, taunting. Every step of the ground opened beneath him. He fell into a pit, endless darkness enveloping him, voices from the lost townspeople swirling around, a figure rising taller, bending impossibly. Its smile stretching wider than sanity, allowing him no escape, only the anticipation of another night, trapped inside the town of patient shadows and psycho horrors that would never let him leave. The shadows multiplied. Every street, every alleyway. He turned corners to find familiar streets, twisted into endless mazes, trees snapping, fingers cracking behind him, footsteps echoing from nowhere. A low growl reverberated in the asphalt. The wind howled, voices of the dead chanting behind him, each corner revealing impossible horrors. Walls, closing shadows, pressing the ground, warping reality. Every breath labored, every heartbeat a drum of terror. He ran into abandoned houses, each room a labyrinth, shadows crawling across walls, floors, bending ceilings, dropping closer with figures stretching from above. Unseen hands clawing, grabbing, brushing him, cold nails scraping skin, blood not visible, but felt the pain. He tried to hide in basements, damp, cold, smelling of rot faces, pressed into the walls, whispering, screaming, crying, each step echoing in his mind. The motel was no longer a building. It was a living organism, pulsing, breathing, feeding. In the night stretched, endlessly twisting, the sky stars, vanishing moon, melting into red haze. He screamed internally, externally, silently, simultaneously, trapped in an unending nightmare dimension where every human shape melted into shadow, into whisper, into hunger. He fell into endless corridors, staircases folding into themselves, ceiling dropping, floor rising, the shadows converging, waiting, testing him, and consumed him completely, bolting him into its eternal psycho horror nightmare, waiting for the next soul to wander into its neon flickering trap. It was a pitch-black, stormy night in a remote Pennsylvania town when a young journalist named Alex arrived to investigate the disappearance of several locals. The streetlights flickered violently, casting long, twisted shadows across empty sidewalks, and the wind carried whispers that sounded like distant cries. He stepped into an old abandoned cabin surrounded by towering pine trees. Branches clawing at the walls and windows as if warning him to leave. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark hallway thick with dust and cobwebs. His flashlight flickered as he walked further, the floorboards groaning under each step, a strange chill crawling up his spine. Suddenly, he heard a slow, deliberate scratching sound behind the walls, like nails scraping wood. He froze, every muscle tense, heart pounding in his chest. The sound moved closer. He spun around and glimpsed a shadow, darting past the doorway, taller than any human body, impossibly thin and contorted in angles that made his stomach twist, his breathing shallow. He moved cautiously to the next room, where the fireplace was still warm, as if someone had been there moments ago. The room was filled with old newspapers scattered across the floor, headlines of missing persons, blood-stained and yellowed with age, the air thick with decay and the faint metallic smell of rust. His flashlight beam landed on a figure crouched in the corner, its face hidden by long stringy hair, but when it lifted its head, he saw eyes completely black with tiny glints of red, staring directly into his soul, and the grin so wide, stretching unnaturally across its face that he wanted to look away, but couldn't. The figure rose, slowly, limbs bending in ways no human limbs should bend, and moved toward him silently, each step making no sound, yet pressing heavily on his chest, like gravity itself had turned against him. He stumbled backward into a narrow staircase leading down into a basement. The air grew colder. Each step, he descended to the darkness, enveloping him thick and alive. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing shadows, forming shapes of faces, screaming mouths, twisted eyes, watching him from every angle. A low chanting began, soft at first, then louder voices of the missing blending into a cacophony of whispers and wails. He reached the basement floor, a room lined with broken mirrors, every reflection showing versions of himself, distorted and screaming. One mirror showed him kneeling while dozens of shadowy hands reached for him. Another showed his face melting into darkness as if swallowed by the walls. The tall figure entered behind him, disappearing and reappearing in every mirror at once, whispering in a voice like nails on chalkboard, "You belong to us now." The floor beneath him split open, revealing a pit of writhing bodies, reaching upward, their hands clawing, fingers grasping, desperate for release. He tried to jump back, but unseen forces pushed him forward into the abyss. He fell endlessly, the shadows enveloping him, screaming voices filling his mind. He tried to cry out, but the air thickened, suffocating every sound. And then he was in a narrow forest, clearing mist, curling around, and all trees, roots twisting like serpents, reaching for him. The lantern swung from above, revealing dozens of hooded figures with empty eyes, pointing at him, chanting his name. The wind carried echoes of screams from the cabin, from the bodies, from the mirrors. He ran desperately through the fog branches, tearing his clothes, scratching his skin. His flashlight flickered on the ground, showing a figure standing still, its head tilted possibly to the side, smiling as if enjoying his terror. He tripped over unseen roots and tumbled into a shallow stream, the water burning cold, like ice mixed with fire, pulling him downstream into darkness. The night sky roared with lightning, revealing glimpses of shadowy faces. Floating above him, hands reaching through the mist, grabbing at his ankles, dragging him into mud and roots he surfaced. Gasping, but the shadows rose from every direction surrounding him. He tried to escape through the forest path, but the path twisted, endlessly looping back toward the cabin, each tree now bearing a grotesque face, mouths opening, screaming silently. Eyes following him, he stumbled into a clearing where the ground cracked, revealing crawling shadows. Rising like smoke, twisting around him, the hooded figures from before appeared, surrounding him, forming a circle, each whispering promises, threats, demands, his heart racing, each second stretching into eternity. Then a door appeared in the center of the circle, glowing faintly. He ran toward it, hoping to escape, and opened it, only to find himself back in the basement room, lined with mirrors, reflections showing not him, but dozens of shadowy versions of himself, trapped, screaming, pleading, mocking him. The tall, contorted figure appeared behind the reflection of his own face. Grinning wider than sanity allowed, whispered, "You can never leave the town. You are ours now." And the mirror shattered pieces, flying into his skin, cutting, yet not bleeding. The shadows pressed closer, suffocating his mind. He tried to scream, to run, but every wall pulsated and shifted, trapping him endlessly. The chanting grew louder, voices of all the lost, merging into a single chorus. He fell to the ground of the shadows, crawling over him, absorbing him into the darkness. And then he woke in his car outside the cabin, rain pouring down windshield, fogged over, a heartbeat deafening, still seeing fleeting shadows in the trees, as if the town itself was watching, waiting for the next night, when he would return, trapped forever in this psycho-horror nightmare, echoing the cries of the missing, and the grin of that impossible face burned into his mind, never to leave the forest, never to leave the cabin, never to escape the shadows, patient, timeless, hungry, and watching, ready for the next soul, brave or foolish enough to enter its cursed town. It was a storm last night in a forgotten town in Maine. A young woman named Emily drove along the twisting, fog-covered road toward an ancient ancestral mansion, and she had never visited before. The wind howled through skeletal trees, branches clawing at her windshield as if warning her to turn back. The sparse streetlights flickered grotesque shadows, dancing across the empty road, and with every mile, the fog thickened, swallowing the pavement and horizon, as if the town itself was alive, observing her every heartbeat, her chest tight with anxiety, her hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles turned ways. She felt eyes from the darkness beyond the trees, following her silently. When she finally reached the mansion, the iron gates groaned, opened behind her. She stepped onto the cracked stone path of the mansion, looming like a sentinel of nightmares, windows broken, some boarded shadows shifting in the panes. She pushed the creaking door open, cold air rushing out, extinguishing the lantern. She held, revealing a grand hallway draped in dust cobwebs and decaying portraits, eyes following her every move, floorboards groaning beneath. Each step she moved cautiously, then a soft whisper called her name. She spun and glimpsed a tall humanoid figure in the corner, elongated limbs, bending impossibly, head tilted sideways, eyes glowing faint red, a grin stretching unnaturally from ear to ear. Her muscles froze in terror, coursing through her veins. The figure advanced silently, the walls pulsated, shadows stretching and warping reflections in tarnished mirrors, showing not her face, but dozens of twisted, screaming versions of herself. She bolted toward the grand staircase, but hallways elongated, endlessly stretching her steps into eternity. The chandelier swayed, violently casting moving shadows across walls. The library ahead beckoned. She stumbled inside shelves, towering overhead, books littering the floor, opening on their own, revealing pages filled with screaming faces chanting. Shadows, then a cold hand grasped her shoulder. She spun and saw dozens of ghostly children, eyes hollow mouths, opening unnaturally whispering. She screamed the chandeliers. Love dripped black liquid smelling of decay. She ran the stairs, twisted beneath. Her feet each step folding into a new corridor. Paintings on walls became faces' mouths. Screaming eyes staring, she fell into the dining hall. The table stretched infinitely ghostly figures seated. Staring with unnaturally wide grins, she crawled across. The floorboards cracking. Every second the tall figure appeared at the far end, splitting into 5 identical versions, each moving differently, surrounding her knives and utensils, floating in the kitchen levitated doors, slamming windows, breaking. Ambient screams of unseen people filling the night. The wind carried whispers of long dead, urging her to join them. She tumbled down the twisted staircase into the basement. The air, icy thick, with whispers chanting her name. Walls made of fused human. Bones, faces pressed, mouths screaming, eyes glaring. She tried to run, but the floor cracked beneath, revealing a pit, writhing behind his hands. Clawing upward, the tall figure appeared from the shadows, merging with the walls, its grin wider than sanity. A loud whispering, "You belong to us now." Every shadow in the room surged forward, a tidal wave, dragging her into darkness. She screamed silently, her mind filled with visions of every face she had seen. Mirrors, books, shadows flash in her mind, pulsating. With terror, she woke in her car outside the mansion, rain pouring, windshield fogged hard. Hammering, she saw shadows moving between trees, closer with each blink. The mansion seemed to disappear, yet the fog thickened. The road stretched endlessly, rearview mirror reflecting dozens of glowing eyes staring at her. She drove blindly, the trees bending unnaturally, the wind carrying whispers of her own name. She reached a forest, clearing roots, twisting like serpents, reaching for her branches, clawing at her clothing. Shadows pooling at the base of gnarled trees, mist curling in unnatural shapes. She stumbled and fell. The ground beneath cracking, revealing crawling shadows, rising like smoke. Figures converging around her, hooded figures from before, appearing, forming a circle, chanting her name, pointing with empty eyes. The fog thickened. Each step she took, the ground pulsed, shadows multiplying, pressing closer. She saw a glowing door in the center of the circle, illuminated faintly, beckoning. Escape. She ran, but each shadow surged faster around her. The door opened, and she fell into another corridor, lined with mirrors, each reflection showing dozens of twisted versions. Screaming silently, tall figures emerging from every mirror, pointing at her. She ran the corridor, twisting endlessly, chandeliers dripping black liquid, shadows crawling, ceiling floor stretching. Impossibly, the mansion itself, alive, pulsating walls, breathing the air, thick with anticipation, terror pressing from all sides. Finally, she fell into the underground chamber, walls lined with fused bones, faces pressed into mud, screaming mouths open, eyes glaring. The gigantic shadow figure towering above, eyes glowing impossibly red, grin stretching beyond comprehension. It whispered, "You will never leave the town. Your soul is ours, forever." The shadows pressed closer, suffocating every sound, every thought. She tried to scream, to run, to fight, but the darkness consumed her entirely, merging with her body, mind, soul. She woke again in her car, rain pouring, windshield fogged, heartbeat, deafening glimpses of shadows flickering through the trees. Mansion gone, but the air heavy with presence, eyes following her every step. The town, endless road stretching infinitely, twisted trees, branches, clawing wind carrying whispers. She screamed internally, externally, simultaneously, knowing the mansion would rise again. The shadows would return. The grin would appear in mirrors, corners, shadows in every street she drove. The fog thickening, swallowing everything. She tried to escape, but each mile looping back. The cursed town, the mansion, patient, timeless, hungry shadows ready to consume next brave. So, she was trapped, forever haunted by eyes that never blinked, mouths that never closed, and that impossibly wide grin echoing endlessly in her mind, every reflection, every shadow, every street waiting, watching her until eternity. With no escape, no rest, no release, the night never ending, the terror perpetual, the town alive, the mansion alive, the shadows alive, as she would run endlessly through fog-twisted roads. Haunted quarters, chasing a glimpse of hope that never existed, forever trapped in psycho-horror nightmares. She ran through alleys, the streetlights flickering, casting monstrous shadows, walls bending. Whispering her name, she stumbled into an abandoned chapel, shadows crawling from pews, ceiling cracked, the altar bleeding, shadows reaching for her, the floorboards cracked beneath screaming faces. She tried to climb out windows, twisted frames preventing escape of the town itself, reshaping doors, vanishing staircases, elongating. She fell into a trapdoor, underground tunnels, winding, endlessly, figures emerging, the air thick with whispers, chanting, merging into an end. Unbearable chorus. She was dragged into a chamber lined with mirrors, hundreds of distorted faces screaming silently, each mirror reflecting new horrors, each step crushing sanity, every shadow breathing darkness. Finally, she confronted the tallest figure. The shadow merged all smaller shadows into one mass, its grand, impossibly wide whispering, "Your fear is ours." Forever she tried to fight, scream, run, vanish, but the darkness pressed every limb, every thought into submission. She realized the cursed town, the mansion, the shadows would never release her. She would run endlessly, the road folding, twisting, fog thickened, the town alive, the shadows alive, patient, hungry, watching, waiting, consuming every soul daring to enter the cursed streets. Mansion rising again and again, the grin never leaving eyes, never closing teeth, always ready forever. Horror, perpetual, relentless, inescapable.